The first time Samuel Xavier saw Julia Sawyer was through the pre-dawn darkness of a February morning in 1883, and he knew immediately that his life would never be the same again. Denver, Colorado had grown from a rough mining camp into a bustling city over the past 20 years, but at 4 in the morning, even its busiest streets lay quiet under a blanket of fresh snow. Samuel had been riding fence for the Patterson Ranch just outside the city limits, and he had returned early that morning with a shoulder injury from a spooked horse. Unable to sleep through the pain, he had wandered to his window at the boarding house on Larimer Street, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the empty street below. That was when he saw her. A slight figure moved through the darkness, carrying a heavy canvas bag over one shoulder. At first, Samuel thought it might be a young boy, given the hour and the work, but as she passed under the gas lamp near the corner, he caught sight of her face. She could not have been more than 20 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of both strength and necessity. She moved with purpose, pulling newspapers from her bag and leaving them on doorsteps, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Samuel found himself drawn to the window every morning after that. His shoulder healed slowly, giving him an excuse to remain in town rather than returning to the ranch. He learned her routine quickly. She began her route at exactly 4:15 each morning, starting at the north end of Larimer Street and working her way south and east through the residential areas. She wore the same worn brown coat every day, and she never seemed to slow down, no matter how deep the snow or how bitter the wind. On the 7th morning of watching her, Samuel made a decision that surprised even himself. He rose at 4 in the morning, dressed warmly, and waited outside the boarding house. When she appeared, right on schedule, he fell into step beside her. She startled at first, her hand going to the small knife he could see tucked into her belt. In Denver, even with its growing civilization, a woman alone had to be cautious. "I do not mean any harm," Samuel said quickly, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I have been watching you pass by each morning, and I thought you might appreciate some company. These streets are not always safe before dawn." Julia studied him with sharp green eyes, taking in his weathered face, his honest expression, and the cowboy hat he held respectfully in his hands. "I have been delivering papers for 3 years now," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the early hour. "I have managed just fine on my own." "I do not doubt that for a second," Samuel replied, "but that does not mean you have to continue managing alone, does it?" She considered this for a long moment, then shrugged and continued walking. "Suit yourself, but I move fast and I will not slow down for you." Samuel smiled and replaced his hat. "I would not ask you to." They walked in silence for the first few blocks. Samuel watched as she delivered papers with practiced efficiency, her movements quick and sure even in the darkness. She knew exactly which houses took the morning edition and which did not. She knew which dogs would bark and which steps creaked. She moved through the sleeping city like a ghost, leaving news in her wake. "Why do you do this?" Samuel asked finally. "Deliver papers, I mean. It seems like hard work for a woman." Julia shot him a look that could have frozen the Arkansas River. "It is hard work for anyone. And I do it because I need the money, not that it is any of your business." "You are right," Samuel said. "I apologize. That was presumptuous of me." She seemed surprised by his easy acceptance of the rebuke. They continued in silence for another block before she spoke again. "My father died 2 years ago. Mining accident up in Leadville. My mother is not well. She has consumption and the medicine is expensive. My younger brother, he is only 14 and he works at the rail yard, but it is not enough." So I deliver papers in the morning, and I work at the dry goods store during the day, and I take in mending at night. The matter-of-fact way she recited these hardships struck Samuel more deeply than any plea for sympathy could have. "That is a heavy load for one person," he said quietly. "We all carry what we must," Julia replied. They reached the end of her route just as the first hint of gray began to lighten the eastern sky. She turned to face him, adjusting the empty bag on her shoulder. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Xavier, Samuel Xavier, but please call me Samuel." "Mr. Xavier," she said firmly, "I appreciate that you made the walk, but I do not need a guardian. I have been doing just fine." "I am sure you have," Samuel said. "But would you permit me to walk with you again tomorrow, not as a guardian, but as a friend?" Julia studied him for a long moment. "Why would you want to wake before dawn just to walk beside a newspaper girl?" "Because," Samuel said honestly, "in all my 30 years, I have never met anyone who impressed me quite as much as you do." A faint flush colored her cheeks, though she tried to hide it by turning away. "Tomorrow is Sunday. I do not deliver on Sundays." "Monday, then," she hesitated, then nodded once curtly. "Monday. But I leave at 4:15 exactly. If you are late, I will not wait." Samuel found himself grinning as he watched her walk away toward a small house on the east side of town. He had not felt this way since he was a boy, this mixture of excitement and nervousness and hope. He returned to the boarding house and managed to sleep for a few hours before the landlady called him for breakfast. The other boarders, mostly miners and ranch hands passing through, barely noticed his good mood, but Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house, gave him a knowing look. "You have been going out early," she observed, refilling his coffee cup. "Just taking morning walks," Samuel said, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Chen said, her Chinese accent still strong even after 20 years in America. "Must be very interesting walks to make a man smile like that." Samuel spent Saturday doing odd jobs around the boarding house, earning his keep while his shoulder continued to mend. Mrs. Chen was a fair employer, and she had given him reduced rent in exchange for repairs around the property. He fixed a loose railing on the front steps, patched a leak in the roof, and helped move furniture in one of the upstairs rooms. The work kept his hands busy, but his mind kept wandering to Julia Sawyer and her determined morning walks through the dark streets. Sunday morning, he woke at dawn out of habit and found himself restless. He attended services at the small Methodist church on Curtis Street, where he had been going occasionally since arriving in Denver 6 months earlier. The sermon was about bearing one another's burdens, and Samuel could not help but think of Julia, carrying so much responsibility on her young shoulders. After church, he walked through the city, ostensibly exploring but really just trying to pass the time until Monday morning. Denver was growing rapidly, with new buildings going up every month. The railroad had brought prosperity and people, transforming the rough mining town into something resembling a proper city. But beneath the civilized veneer, the Wild West still existed. Saloons outnumbered churches, and justice was often decided by who drew their gun first. Samuel had come to Denver from Texas, following work and trying to outrun old memories. He had grown up on a ranch outside San Antonio, the youngest of 5 brothers. When his parents died within a year of each other, the ranch had gone to his oldest brother, and Samuel had found himself at loose ends. He had spent the better part of 10 years drifting from ranch to ranch, working cattle drives and breaking horses, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But something about Denver had made him pause. Maybe it was the mountains rising to the west, so different from the flat Texas plains. Maybe it was the sense that this city was still becoming something, still defining itself. Or maybe, he thought with a wry smile, it was just that he was tired of drifting. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Samuel was dressed and waiting outside the boarding house at 4:10, and when Julia appeared at exactly 4:15, she looked almost surprised to see him there. "You came," she said simply. "I said I would." They fell into step together, and this time the silence felt more comfortable. Samuel helped by carrying the bag when they reached the halfway point, and though Julia protested at first, she eventually allowed it. He could see the relief in her shoulders when the weight was lifted, and it made him angry that she had been carrying such burdens alone for so long. "Tell me about Texas," Julia said as they walked through the quiet streets. "I can hear it in your voice, the way you talk." So Samuel told her about the ranch where he grew up, about herding cattle through rivers swollen with spring rain, about nights under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He told her about his brothers, all of them married now with children of their own, all of them still working ranches in various parts of Texas. "You miss it?" Julia asked. "Sometimes," Samuel admitted, "but there was nothing left for me there. My brothers, they all found their places. I guess I am still looking for mine." "And you think you might find it in Denver?" Samuel looked at her, at the way the pre-dawn light caught in her dark hair, at the determined set of her shoulders and the quiet strength in her eyes. "I am beginning to think I might," he said. They continued their morning walks throughout that week and into the next. Samuel learned that Julia had grown up in Denver, that her father had been a miner who dreamed of striking it rich but never did, that her mother had been a schoolteacher before illness forced her to stop working. He learned that Julia's younger brother, James, was small for his age but fiercely determined to help support the family. He learned that Julia loved to read, that she often skimmed the newspapers before delivering them, memorizing articles about places she had never been and likely never would go. "Have you ever thought about doing something else?" Samuel asked one morning. "Not that there is anything wrong with delivering papers, but you seem like someone who could do anything you set your mind to." Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do what?" "Women in this town can be teachers if they have education. They can be seamstresses or laundresses or work in shops. The pay is barely enough to live on, and it requires working during the day when I need to be home with my mother. At least with the papers, I can finish before dawn and still do other work." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Samuel pressed. Julia was quiet for a long moment. "I would write," she said finally. "Not just read the news, but write it. Go places and see things and tell people about them, but that is just a foolish dream." "I do not think it is foolish at all," Samuel said seriously. "I think you would be brilliant at it." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know you are dedicated and strong and brave enough to walk through dark streets alone every morning. I know you read everything you can get your hands on and remember it. I know you support your whole family without complaint. That tells me plenty about who you are." Julia turned away, but not before Samuel saw the shine of tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. That Sunday, Samuel gathered his courage and knocked on the door of the small house where Julia lived with her mother and brother. James answered the door, a thin boy with suspicious eyes and his sister's same determined jaw. "What do you want?" the boy asked. "My name is Samuel Xavier. I have been walking with your sister during her morning route. I was hoping to speak with her if she is home." James looked him up and down, clearly trying to decide if Samuel represented a threat. Finally, he called over his shoulder, "Julia, there is a cowboy here to see you." Julia appeared in the doorway, looking different than Samuel had ever seen her. She wore a simple dress instead of her usual practical trousers and coat, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Samuel," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I was hoping you might take a walk with me," Samuel said, suddenly feeling foolish. "I know you must be busy, but it is a nice afternoon, and I thought—" "I would like that," Julia said, cutting off his rambling. She turned to her brother. "James, stay with Mother. I will be back in an hour." They walked through the residential streets, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with winter snow despite the arrival of March. "I have never seen them up close," Julia said, gazing at the mountains. "The mountains, I mean. I have lived in their shadow my whole life, but I have never actually been to them." "Would you like to?" Samuel asked. "We could take a ride out there someday. I could borrow horses from the ranch." Julia shook her head. "I could not be gone that long. My mother needs me." "What about what you need?" Samuel asked gently. Julia stopped walking and turned to face him. "What I need does not matter. My mother is dying, Samuel. The doctor says she has maybe a year, possibly less. What I need is to make sure she is comfortable and that James will be taken care of when she is gone." "And what about you?" Samuel asked. "Who will take care of you?" "I will take care of myself," Julia said. "I always have." "You do not have to," Samuel said. He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to either make the best or worst decision of his life. "Julia, I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are the strongest, most capable person I have ever met, and you are also the most beautiful. I want to help you. I want to be there for you. I want—" "Stop," Julia said, holding up a hand. Her voice was shaking. "Please stop." Samuel fell silent, his heart sinking. "I cannot," Julia continued. "I cannot let myself want things I cannot have. I cannot let myself care about you like that because there is no room in my life for it. Do you understand? Every minute of every day is spoken for. I wake at 4 to deliver papers. I work at the store from 8 until 5. I come home and take care of my mother and do mending until midnight. I sleep for 4 hours and do it all over again. There is no space for anything else." "Then make space," Samuel said. "Let me help you carry the load. You do not have to do this alone." "But I do," Julia said, and now tears were streaming down her face. "Because if I let myself depend on someone, if I let myself lean on someone, what happens when they leave? What happens when they realize how much work it all is and decide it is not worth it? I cannot risk that. I cannot risk falling apart when I have to hold everything together." Samuel wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and promise her that he would never leave, but he sensed that she needed space. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. I will be there tomorrow morning at 4:15 to walk with you, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, for as long as you will have me. You do not have to let me into your heart, Julia, but I am going to be there anyway, proving to you that some people stay." Julia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You are making this very difficult." "Good," Samuel said, and was rewarded with a small, watery laugh. They walked back to her house mostly in silence, but it felt different than before. Something had shifted between them. Some barrier had been acknowledged even if it had not yet been broken down. True to his word, Samuel was waiting outside the boarding house at 4:15 the next morning. Julia looked at him for a long moment when she appeared, something unreadable in her expression, but she did not send him away. They walked the route together, falling back into their comfortable rhythm. Spring came slowly to Denver that year. March brought more snow before the weather finally began to warm in April. The streets turned to mud, making Julia's morning route more treacherous, but Samuel was always there, steadying her when she slipped and carrying the heavy bag without being asked. He returned to work at the Patterson Ranch in late March, but he made sure to be back in town every evening so he could be there for the morning walks. It meant long days and little sleep, but Samuel found he did not mind. The hour he spent with Julia each morning was worth any amount of exhaustion. Slowly, gradually, Julia began to open up to him. She told him about her dreams of traveling, of seeing the ocean and the great cities of the East. She told him about the books she loved, about the stories that transported her far from the small house and the responsibilities that weighed her down. She told him about her fear that her mother's death would destroy her brother, who had already lost so much. In turn, Samuel told her things he had never told anyone. He told her about the loneliness of drifting, of never having a place that felt like home. He told her about the guilt he felt for leaving his brothers, even though they had never asked him to stay. He told her about the dreams he had given up on, of having a family and a piece of land to call his own. "You could still have those things," Julia said one morning in late April. The sun was rising earlier now, and the sky was already growing light as they finished the route. "You are only 30. That is not too old to start over." "It is not about age," Samuel said. "It is about finding the right person to build a life with, and I already have." Julia stopped walking and looked at him. "Samuel, I am not asking you for anything," Samuel said quickly. "I am just stating a fact. You asked me what I want, and that is it. I want a life with you. I want to help you take care of your mother and your brother. I want to be there when you wake up and when you go to sleep. I want to grow old with you and watch you become the writer I know you can be. I want all of it, Julia, all of you, for the rest of my life." Julia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know," Samuel said, "but I am right here and I am not going anywhere." She closed the distance between them and kissed him, and Samuel felt his whole world shift on its axis. Her lips were soft and cold from the morning air, and she tasted like hope and possibility, and everything he had been searching for. When they finally broke apart, Julia was smiling through her tears. "I suppose this means you are courting me now," she said. "I suppose it does," Samuel agreed. "If you will have me." "On one condition," Julia said. "You have to meet my mother properly, and you have to understand that she and James come first. They have to come first, Samuel. I need you to understand that." "I do understand," Samuel said, "and I would not want it any other way. The fact that you love them so fiercely is one of the things I love most about you." Julia brought him to the house that evening. Her mother, Margaret, was a frail woman who looked older than her 45 years. Consumption had ravaged her body, leaving her weak and prone to terrible coughing fits. But her eyes were sharp and knowing, and she studied Samuel carefully when Julia introduced them. "So you are the cowboy who has been walking with my daughter," Margaret said, her voice thin but firm. "Yes, madam," Samuel said. "I hope that is all right with you." "That depends," Margaret said. "What are your intentions toward my daughter?" "I love her," Samuel said simply, "and I want to marry her if she will have me. I want to take care of her and you and James for as long as you will let me." Margaret looked at Julia, who nodded slightly. Then she looked back at Samuel. "My daughter has been carrying this family on her shoulders for 2 years now. She has given up everything to take care of us. I need to know that you will not become another burden for her to carry." "I swear to you that I will not," Samuel said. "I want to help ease her burdens, not add to them." Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then. You have my blessing to court her. But hurt her and you will answer to me, cowboy. Dying woman or not, I will find a way to make you regret it." Samuel could not help but smile. "I believe you would, madam." James was harder to win over. The boy watched Samuel with suspicious eyes for weeks, clearly trying to find some flaw or weakness. Samuel did not push, but he made sure to include James whenever possible. He taught the boy to ride during the long spring evenings, using a gentle mare from the Patterson ranch. He helped James with his letters, filling in the gaps left by the boy's sporadic education. Slowly, grudgingly, James began to warm to him. "My sister is happy," James said one evening as they were grooming the horses after a ride. "I have not seen her happy in a long time." "I plan to keep her that way," Samuel said. "You better," James said, trying to sound tough but not quite managing it. "Because if you do not, I will." "I know," Samuel said, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You will make me regret it. You Sawyers are not a family to cross." James grinned despite himself. The weeks passed quickly. Samuel continued to wake before dawn each morning to walk with Julia, and they spent their evenings together when work allowed. He took her riding in the foothills, showing her the mountains she had never seen up close. They packed simple picnics and found quiet places where they could talk for hours without interruption. Julia told him more about her dreams of writing, and Samuel encouraged her to start putting words on paper. He bought her a journal from the general store, a leather-bound book that cost him a week's wages, and Julia cried when he gave it to her. "I cannot accept this," she said. "It is too much." "It is not nearly enough," Samuel said. "Write in it, Julia. Write about the things you see and the places you want to go. Someday, when you are a famous journalist, you can look back at this book and remember where you started." Julia filled the pages quickly, writing late into the night after she finished her mending. She wrote about Denver and its changing landscape, about the people she met on her morning routes, about the dreams she carried and the fears that haunted her. She showed some of her pieces to Samuel, and he was amazed by her talent. She had a gift for capturing moments in words, for making the ordinary seem extraordinary. "You should submit something to the newspaper," Samuel said after reading a particularly beautiful piece about watching the sunrise from the mountains. "The Denver Tribune is always looking for contributors." "They would never publish something by a woman," Julia said dismissively. "Then do not tell them you are a woman," Samuel said. "Use initials, JS. They will not know the difference until after they have accepted your work." Julia looked at him with wonder. That might actually work." She submitted 3 pieces to the Tribune under the byline JS, and 2 weeks later one of them was published. Julia was beside herself with excitement when she saw her words in print, even if her name was not attached. The Tribune sent her $2 for the piece, more money than she made in a full day at the dry goods store. "They want more," Julia told Samuel, waving the letter that had come with the payment. "They said my writing style is fresh and engaging, and they want me to contribute regularly." Samuel swept her up in his arms and spun her around, making her laugh. "I told you," he said. "I told you that you were brilliant." The joy of that moment was tempered by the steady decline of Julia's mother. By June, Margaret was bedridden, and Julia had to quit her job at the dry goods store to care for her full-time. The loss of that income was devastating to the family's already precarious finances. Samuel stepped in without being asked. He paid the rent on the small house and bought food and medicine. When Julia protested, he simply said, "We are going to be family soon. Let me do this." But Julia's pride would not let her accept charity, even from the man she loved. "I have to contribute," she insisted. "I have to earn my own way." "Then write," Samuel said. "The Tribune will pay you for your articles, and I can help you place pieces with other papers too. Write about what you see, about the city and the people in it. You have a gift, Julia. Use it." So Julia wrote. She wrote about the immigrant families flooding into Denver, about the Chinese laborers building the railroads and facing discrimination, about the women struggling to make lives for themselves in a city built by and for men. Her articles were powerful and moving, and more newspapers began to pick them up. The money was not much, but it was something, and it let Julia feel like she was still contributing to her family's support. Margaret died on a warm July evening with Julia and James and Samuel all gathered around her bed. Her last words were to Julia, "Be happy, my darling girl. You have given me so much. Now go and live for yourself." Julia collapsed into Samuel's arms as her mother took her last breath, and he held her while she sobbed. James cried too, and Samuel gathered them both close, letting them grieve. The funeral was small but well attended. Julia had not realized how many people knew her, how many lives she had touched during her years of delivering papers and working in the store. Neighbors brought food and offered condolences, and the editor of the Tribune, a gruff man named Thomas Hewitt, even attended. "I wanted to pay my respects," Hewitt told Julia after the service, "and to tell you that I know who J.S. really is. Your writing is too good to hide behind initials, Miss Sawyer. I want to offer you a job as a regular correspondent for the Tribune. Full-time work, proper byline, fair wages." Julia stared at him in shock. "But I am a woman." "I noticed," Hewitt said dryly, "and I do not care. You are also the best writer I have seen in 10 years, so what do you say? Will you write for me?" Julia looked at Samuel, who was grinning like a fool. Then she looked back at Hewitt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." With her mother gone and her new job at the Tribune, Julia's life began to change. She still delivered papers in the morning because the extra income helped, and Samuel still walked with her because neither of them could imagine starting the day any other way. But she spent her days now at the Tribune office, writing stories and learning the newspaper business from the ground up. She wrote about everything from city politics to human interest stories about Denver's residents. Her work was sharp and compassionate, and readers began to ask for her pieces specifically. She signed them Julia Sawyer now, proud to have her full name attached to her words. Samuel proposed on a September evening 6 months after Margaret's death. They were riding in the foothills, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. He got down on one knee in the prairie grass and pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Julia Sawyer," he said, "you are the bravest, strongest, most brilliant woman I have ever met. You have made me want to be a better man. You have given me a reason to stop drifting and start building a life. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Julia did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in October, in the same church where Samuel had prayed for guidance all those months ago. James stood up as Samuel's best man, looking proud and grown up in a borrowed suit. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house attended, along with Julia's colleagues from the Tribune and Samuel's friends from the ranch. It was a small wedding, but it was perfect. The newlyweds moved into a larger house on the west side of Denver, with enough room for James and a small office where Julia could write. Samuel took a job as foreman at the Patterson Ranch, which paid better and kept him close to home most evenings. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, working hard during the day and coming home to each other at night. Julia continued to deliver papers most mornings, and Samuel continued to walk with her. It was their time together, that quiet hour before dawn when the city still slept and the world felt like it belonged only to them. They talked about their plans for the future, about the stories Julia wanted to write and the land Samuel wanted to buy. "I want a ranch of our own someday," Samuel told her one morning as they walked through the familiar streets. "Not huge, just enough to make a living. Somewhere with a view of the mountains. I want to raise horses and cattle, and I want James to have a place to call home when he is ready." "That sounds perfect," Julia said, slipping her hand into his. "Although I hope there is room in this vision for children of our own." Samuel stopped walking and looked at her, hardly daring to hope. "Are you saying Julia smiled, that beautiful smile that still made his heart race. "I am saying that we are going to have a baby, Samuel. Sometime in May, the doctor thinks." Samuel let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the quiet streets, making Julia laugh. He picked her up and spun her around, careful but exuberant. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "And you are going to be wonderful at it," Julia said, cupping his face in her hands. "Just like you are wonderful at everything else." The baby came in late May of 1885, a healthy boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas Samuel Xavier, after Thomas Hewitt, who had given Julia her chance at the Tribune, and after Samuel himself. Little Tommy, as they called him, was adored by everyone, but especially by his Uncle James, who had just turned 16 and took his role very seriously. Julia took 3 months off from the Tribune to care for the baby, but she found she could not stay away from writing entirely. She wrote from home, penning essays about motherhood and the changing role of women in the West. The pieces were popular, bringing in letters from readers all over Colorado who saw their own lives reflected in her words. When Tommy was 6 months old, Julia began working at the Tribune again part-time, bringing the baby with her when she needed to. Hewitt had cleared out a storage room and converted it into a small nursery, understanding that he would lose his best writer if he demanded she choose between her work and her child. Samuel thrived in his role as a father. He would wake in the night to walk the floor with Tommy when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. He took the boy on rides before he could even walk, securing him carefully in the saddle and showing him the mountains and the prairie. 2 years after Tommy was born, Julia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. Samuel took over more of the household duties, and James helped by taking care of Tommy while juggling his own job at the rail yard. Their daughter was born in January of 1888 in the middle of a fierce snowstorm. She came early and small, and for a few terrifying hours, Samuel thought he might lose both his wife and his child. But Julia was as strong as ever, and the baby, though tiny, had fierce lungs and a will to live. They named her Margaret Julia Xavier, after both of their mothers. Little Maggie, as they called her, was a serious baby who watched the world with grave eyes. Tommy, now 3 years old, was enchanted by his sister and wanted to help with everything. Life settled into a new pattern. Samuel had been saving every penny he could spare, and by the time Maggie was a year old, he had enough for a down payment on a small ranch about 10 miles outside Denver. It was not much, just 80 acres with a modest house and a barn that needed repairs, but it had a view of the mountains and good water rights. "What do you think?" Samuel asked Julia as they stood looking at the property for the first time. Tommy was chasing butterflies in the meadow while James held Maggie on his hip. "I think it is perfect," Julia said, leaning against her husband. "I think it is everything we have been working toward." They moved to the ranch in the spring of 1889. Julia continued to write for the Tribune, making the trip into Denver twice a week to deliver her articles and check in with the office. Samuel threw himself into ranching, repairing the barn and fences, and slowly building up a herd of cattle and horses. James, now 21, decided to stay with them rather than finding his own place, working alongside Samuel and learning the ranching trade. The years passed quickly, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel and Julia woke before dawn each morning, not to deliver papers anymore but to feed animals and start their workday. They still treasured that quiet time together, walking to the barn side by side while the children slept, talking about their plans and their dreams. Julia's career continued to flourish. She published a collection of her essays in 1892, a book that sold surprisingly well and earned her recognition beyond Colorado. Newspapers in New York and San Francisco began requesting her pieces, paying rates that seemed extraordinary to a woman who had once delivered papers for pennies. Tommy grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. He showed an early gift for words, and Julia spent hours teaching him to read and write, passing on her love of language. Maggie was quieter but equally determined, preferring to help her father with the animals than to sit still for lessons. In 1894, Julia discovered she was pregnant again at 31 years old. She had thought her family was complete, but the baby came anyway. Another boy they named James Nathan Xavier, after Julia's brother and Samuel's favorite brother back in Texas. Little Nathan was a happy, easy baby who seemed to smile at everything. James Sawyer, now 26, married a girl from town named Sarah who had worked at the general store. They built a small house on the ranch property, and Julia was delighted to have her brother nearby. James and Sarah had their first child in 1896, a daughter they named Margaret after Julia's mother, continuing the family tradition. By the turn of the century, the ranch was thriving. Samuel had developed a reputation for breeding quality horses, and buyers came from all over Colorado to purchase his stock. Julia had published 3 more books and was considered one of the most respected journalists in the western United States. Their children were healthy and happy, and they were surrounded by family and friends. One morning in the spring of 1901, Samuel and Julia took their customary walk before dawn, this time just out to check on a mare who was expected to foal soon. Tommy, now 16, was handling most of the morning chores, and the younger children were still asleep. "You ever think about that first morning I walked with you?" Samuel asked, taking Julia's hand as they crossed the meadow. 18 years ago now. You were so determined to send me away." Julia laughed. "I was terrified of you, not of you specifically, but of what you represented, the possibility of something more than the life I thought I was trapped in." "And now?" Samuel asked. "Now I cannot imagine my life without you in it," Julia said simply. "You gave me so much, Samuel. You gave me support and love and the freedom to become who I was meant to be. You stood beside me through everything." "You did the same for me," Samuel said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting. You gave me a purpose, a reason to build something permanent. You gave me a home." They reached the barn and checked on the mare, who was resting comfortably, but not yet in labor. On their way back to the house, they stopped to watch the sunrise over the mountains, the same mountains Julia had gazed at all those years ago, dreaming of seeing them up close. "I have been thinking," Julia said. "The Tribune wants to send me to cover the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo this fall. It would mean being gone for a couple of weeks." "You should go," Samuel said immediately. "You have always wanted to travel and see more of the country." "Come with me," Julia said, turning to face him. "The children are old enough now. Tommy can watch over things here with James's help. Let us take this trip together. Let us see something new." Samuel smiled and pulled her close. "I would like that very much." They made the trip to Buffalo in September, traveling by train and staying in a proper hotel. Julia covered the exposition for the Tribune, writing vivid descriptions of the exhibits and the crowds. Samuel accompanied her everywhere, marveling at the electric lights and the modern innovations on display. It was strange and wonderful to be away from the ranch, to remember who they were as a couple apart from their roles as parents and workers. On their last night in Buffalo, they attended a concert in the exposition's music hall. As they sat listening to the orchestra, Samuel reached for Julia's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Julia whispered back. for letting me walk beside you all these years," Samuel said. "For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who woke up early just to spend time with a remarkable woman." Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, "for seeing who I could be when I could not see it myself." They returned to Colorado with renewed energy and appreciation for the life they had built. Tommy announced his intention to attend college in Denver, wanting to study law. Maggie, now 13, had developed her father's gift with horses and wanted to help expand that side of the ranch business. Nathan, at 7, was still deciding who he wanted to be but showed promise in everything he tried. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. James's wife Sarah died in childbirth in 1903, leaving him a widower with 3 young children. Samuel and Julia welcomed them all into their home without hesitation, the house expanding to accommodate the growing family. James eventually remarried, a kind widow named Helen, and life settled once more into its rhythms. Tommy graduated from law school in 1906 and opened a practice in Denver, specializing in land rights and water law. He married his college sweetheart, Elizabeth, in 1907, and they gave Samuel and Julia their first grandchildren, a pair of twin girls. Maggie took over the horse breeding operation in 1908, at 20 years old, and proved to have an even better eye for quality than her father. Nathan decided to become a teacher, inspired by his mother's stories of her own mother's teaching career. Samuel and Julia grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing slightly but their love only deepening with time. They still walked together each morning, though not as early as they once had. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and gratitude they had felt all those years ago on the dark Denver streets. In 1915, on their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over Colorado to celebrate. Thomas Hewitt, now retired from the Tribune, gave a speech about Julia's contributions to journalism. The current foreman at the Patterson Ranch talked about Samuel's reputation as a horseman and a fair employer. James raised a glass to his sister and the brother-in-law who had become his closest friend. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Samuel and Julia found themselves alone on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. 25 years, Julia mused. How did we get here so fast? One day at a time, Samuel said. One morning walk at a time. Do you have any regrets? Julia asked. Samuel considered the question seriously, then shook his head. Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, and you were worth every moment of searching. Julia kissed him, soft and sweet. I love you, Samuel Xavier. Thank you for waking early just to walk beside me. I love you too, Julia Xavier, Samuel said. Thank you for letting me. They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories. A ranch that would support their family for generations. A love that had started in darkness and grown into something bright and enduring. Years later, when Julia finally retired from regular writing in 1920 at 57 years old, she penned one final essay for the Tribune. It was about a newspaper girl who had thought she knew her limits, who had believed her life was mapped out and unchangeable. And it was about a cowboy who had seen past her defenses to the possibilities within her, who had been patient and steady and true. The essay ended with a line that would be quoted in her obituary decades later, when she died peacefully in her sleep at 89 years old, with Samuel, aged 91, holding her hand. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion or drama, but with the simple act of one person choosing to walk beside another through the darkness, waiting patiently for the dawn. Samuel outlived Julia by 2 years, spending his final days surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them benefiting from the choices he and Julia had made so long ago. He died in 1953 at 93 years old, still on the ranch they had built together, still looking out at the mountains Julia had loved so much. Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. The story of a young woman who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, and a cowboy who had loved her enough to help her carry it. The story of early morning walks through dark streets, of newspapers delivered and dreams pursued. The story of two people who had found each other when they needed it most and had built a lifetime together, one sunrise at a time. The ranch stayed in the family, eventually passing to Maggie's children and then to their children after them. The house was expanded and modernized, but the front porch remained unchanged, the place where Samuel and Julia had spent countless evenings watching the sun set over the mountains. Family gatherings still happened there, and someone always told the story of how it all began. Back in 1883, when a cowboy started waking early just to walk beside a newspaper girl. In the family archives, preserved with care, was Julia's first journal, the one Samuel had given her all those years ago. The leather was worn and the pages yellowed, but the words were still clear. On the first page, in Julia's distinctive handwriting, was an inscription dated October 1883. To Samuel, who saw me before I saw myself, who walked beside me in the darkness and helped me find the light, all my love always. And on the last page, added decades later in an older, shakier hand, we had a good life, my darling. Thank you for every sunrise, every sunset, every moment in between, until we meet again. Their grave markers stood side by side in the small cemetery on the ranch property, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains. The inscriptions were simple. Samuel Xavier, 1853-1953, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Julia Sawyer Xavier, 1863-1952, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, writer. But those who knew their story understood that the real markers of their lives were everywhere, in the words Julia had written that still informed and inspired, in the horses that bore the ranch's brand, descended from the ones Samuel had bred, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values, in the family tradition of early morning walks, passed down through generations, honoring that first walk Samuel and Julia took together through the dark Denver streets. Their love story had not been one of grand gestures or dramatic moments, though there had been plenty of both over the years. Instead, it had been built on the foundation of showing up, day after day, choosing each other over and over again. It had been built on patience and persistence, on seeing the best in each other even in the darkest times. Samuel had woken early just to walk beside Julia, and in doing so, he had changed both of their lives forever. He had given her support when she needed it most, space when she needed that instead, and unwavering belief in her capabilities. She had given him purpose and belonging, had made him want to stop drifting and start building. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. On quiet mornings, when the ranch was still asleep and the mountains were just beginning to catch the light, some claimed you could still see two figures walking together across the meadow. A tall man with a cowboy hat and a woman with a newspaper bag over her shoulder, moving through the darkness side by side, waiting for the dawn. Whether it was truly their spirits or just the power of their story living on, no one could say for certain. But those who had known them, who had seen the way they looked at each other even after 50 years of marriage, who had witnessed the quiet devotion that marked their daily lives, knew that some loves were strong enough to transcend time and death. Some connections were deep enough to echo through generations. Some stories were powerful enough to become legend, and it had all started with a simple decision made on a cold February morning in 1883. A decision to wake early, to venture out into the darkness, to walk beside someone who did not think she needed anyone's help. A decision that had seemed small at the time, but had rippled out to touch hundreds of lives across more than a century. That was the real magic of Samuel and Julia's story. Not that it was extraordinary, but that it showed how extraordinary the ordinary could be. How much difference one person could make by simply being present, day after day. How love was not always lightning bolts and fireworks, but sometimes just the steady comfort of someone walking beside you in the darkness, helping you carry your burdens until the sun rose again. Their story ended, as all stories must, but its impact continued. In every person who chose to show up for someone they loved, even when it was inconvenient. In every act of quiet devotion that went unnoticed by the world but meant everything to the person receiving it. In every relationship built not on passion alone, but on the steady foundation of partnership and mutual respect. The newspaper girl and the cowboy had found each other in the darkness and had created light together. They had faced hardship and loss, had celebrated triumphs and mourned failures, had raised children and built a legacy. And through it all, they had walked together, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. That was how it ended and how it began and how it would be remembered forever after. Two people, one early morning, one simple choice, and from that choice, a love story for the ages. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come not from grand romantic gestures, but from the quiet decision to wake up early and walk beside someone through the darkness, trusting that together, you will find your way to the dawn. The sun rose over the Colorado mountains, as it had every day for millions of years, and would continue to do for millions more. The ranch stirred to life, another generation beginning their day. The story of Samuel and Julia lived on in the hearts of those who remembered them, in the physical legacy they had built, and in the example they had set for what true love could be. And somewhere, perhaps in some place beyond understanding, a cowboy and a newspaper girl walked together still, eternally young, eternally devoted, proving that some loves really do last forever. Their journey had begun on dark streets in a growing city, and it had led them through a lifetime of joy and sorrow, of triumph and struggle, of love that grew deeper with each passing year. They had walked together through it all, and in the end, that walking together had been the greatest adventure either of them could have hoped for. It was a simple story, really. A love story, a Western story. A story of dedication and perseverance, and the kind of quiet heroism that does not make headlines but changes the world one small choice at a time. The story of a woman who delivered newspapers before dawn, and a cowboy who woke early just to walk beside her. A story that began in darkness and ended in light, and that lived on forever in the hearts of those who heard it and understood its message. That love, real love, is found not in grand gestures but in the simple choice to show up, day after day, walking beside someone through whatever darkness they face, until together you find the dawn.